My name is Mark Armstrong. I'm Head of Workplace for ACC. Privileged to be here today to support the Charter event. ACC is very proud to be a member of the Charter event and raising the bar of health and safety during the rebuild in Christchurch. Lawrence Waterman, for those of you who remember, he was out here last year. He ran a number of workshops with the Charter members, some of them involving that the Charter should be actively led by industry, the role of on-hire and how we can influence that, and also how can we look to improve the Charter communications. But anyway, today's not about me. Today is about listening to Lawrence, and understanding what value that Lawrence can bring to you guys so that you can take that away and introduce that into your organisations. So ACC is very privileged to be working with Lawrence over the last few years. We've certainly got a lot of insight from Lawrence's experience in the London Olympics in Battersea, and I'm pretty sure that you'll get the same out of today. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Lawrence. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much for that introduction. Labour-only subbies aren't usually spoken about in quite such positive terms. I'm very pleased to be here. So the idea is that I'm going to be running through a presentation with you and leaving enough time for a bit of Q&A afterwards. And really it's a question of telling a story. But I thought I'd start by just kind of honouring ACC for making it possible for me to participate in the Charter. But this is the ACC vision, which essentially is about working in partnership with organisations in order to drive down the injury rate. And I can't think of a better aspiration. You know, not all human wisdom is vested in ACC, but working together, we can continue to drive down the harms that arise. And obviously, like Mark, my focus is on workplace. And in particular, because of my experience working on London 2012, and where I'm working now at Battersea Power Station, and my previous career, my particular, if not exclusive focus has been on working in the construction sector, which I think is just a great place to be. When you think about what people were looking for in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, it was social services, healthcare, counselling, a whole range of human-related activities. But it took a matter of moments for people to recognise that civil engineering and what that could deliver in terms of potable water, repair of the sewerage system, beginning to get communications working properly again, and then rebuilding a city, creating new homes for people, repairing the existing damaged ones. Construction industry does a fantastic job in creating new places and repairing, maintaining and keeping up the places that we've already got. And I think that all of us that have had the opportunity, in my case, very small element of it, in your case, much more significant, the opportunity of contributing to the rebuilding of Christchurch, will be looking back on this period with a tremendous sense of pride. But I think a lot of the pride is going to be associated with the way that it's being done, not just with the finished outcomes. Because I think that you genuinely are doing what we tried to do in London 2012, in raising the bar in health and safety performance on site. So what I'm hoping is that by telling a little bit of the story of what happened after Sebastian Coe shook Röger's hand in Singapore on the 6th of July 2005, because London had been awarded the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games for 2012, that what happened at this point onwards is very similar in many ways to your aspirations, your commitments, and the way in which the Safety Charter has operated and individual businesses and individual workers and managers have operated over the last few years. So in a way, like you, there was a vision of what the finished built environment might be like, a vision that is obviously still evolving, and now quite clearly includes the rebuilding of a new version of the cathedral. The Justice Quarter is well underway. There's still lots of debate about, Convention Centre and that whole quarter. So that's something that's developing. And in a similar way, the Olympic Park, now the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, was always designed to be a development platform, not just an end in itself for a fancy event, but something that was going to be developed in the future. So at the moment on the Olympic Park, there's a stadium that's been used for the Rugby World Cup finals, the games that have been played there. And I personally, obviously, since England was knocked out of the World Cup, the Rugby World Cup, very early on, I'm very grateful to ACC to bring me halfway around the world to a country where rugby hardly ever comes up in conversation. But as well as rugby being played in that stadium, it's also the place where athletics events have recently taken place, and it's going to host the World Athletics Championships in 2017, and is going to be the home of West Ham Football Club from next season onwards. In addition, the Aquatic Centre is open and is used by the public as well as being used for sporting events. There's a multi-use arena. But that park, we spent $2 in every 3 on infrastructure because it is a development platform. So at the moment, there's an area, the park is designed so that around the fringes, it will continue to be developed. So there'll be a core of a green park. And already it's had more than 4 million visitors. This is not like Homebush, for those of you that know Sydney. This is not something that is going to take 10 or 15 years to stop the tumbleweed blowing through it to end up being alive. It is thronged with people every day, even in the winter, since it's reopened. And it began reopening just a year after the Games, fully transformed about 6 months later. Since it's reopened, the slowest day has had 15,000 visitors to the park. So this is a very busy, lively space. But there's a school being built. There is one patch where 1,000 homes are being built. 2 more housing developments start next spring. 2 more schools are in design and planning, and will begin work on those towards the back end of next year. This is designed to rebalance London. This is done in a very similar way to the regeneration of Christchurch, that you don't just replace what was already there. You do things in a way that means that it's going to be better in the future. And that's exactly the aim here, is to address the multiple deprivation in this area of London and raise the standards of aspiration, children having opportunities of decent education, decent jobs in the future, decent homes to live in. All of that was part of what we were trying to do. And since that major construction program came to an end, one of our desires to create a legacy for the industry has been reflected in, for example, this project, which is a £6 billion project to double the sewerage capacity of London, to take an infrastructure facility that was originally designed and built in Victorian times and can't cope with the numbers of people that now live and work in the London area. And also, as you know, Victorians only washed once or twice a week. Modern life requires a great deal more capacity in those sorts of facilities than we ever thought were needed. But they've developed a standard. They're driving health, safety, security, and environment. They've woven it together. When you read it, you can see that it's the son or daughter of the health and safety standard that London 2012 published for the first time in 2006, the first public body to make a declaration about what it was going to try and achieve in health and safety and the way that it was going to work to achieve it. And the reason why I was recruited as director of probably the best known real estate development in the world at the moment, the Battersea Power Station redevelopment, a huge site, 3,000 homes, a theatre, a library, a health centre, 2 hotels, commercial offices, and obviously, given the main leisure activity in the UK, when you're not sitting on a couch watching television, you're going shopping apparently. So there'll be lots of retail opportunities here as well. And Battersea, just like you, has got its safety charter, its approach with a commitment to do something. And I think that you are leading in a way that isn't always obvious. Look, you know that the All Blacks are respected and looked up to, but generally this is a country that is worried about, tall poppies and being, rather humble and always looking to other people to set standards. But people around the world are looking at what you're doing, the way that you're bringing constructors, owners and clients, insurers, regulators, and others like ACC together in order to try and achieve higher standards. And I think there's that collective effort that means that you don't say exactly how you're going to do it tomorrow. You say what we'll do tomorrow is what we've been doing up until now, is that we'll discuss what the issues are and try and come to the best option using the collective wisdom and the commitment of everyone concerned. And I think that that means that you're establishing a process that can be reproduced for Auckland house building, in Transmission Gully, outside Wellington. And I think you are not setting a standard that says it's got to be 27.2 and coloured blue on a Thursday. You're setting a standard about the way that you go about working, not just the detailed content of it. And that means that it drives continual improvement. And I think that's really impressive. We didn't start with badly damaged buildings because of an earthquake, but we did start with a pretty shitty site. I mean, it was an area that was underdeveloped, unloved. When you get these kind of tyre dumps, fridge dumps, we had Europe's largest fridge mountain, lots of dumped cars across the site. I mean, it was clearly a place that people weren't looking after. And because we were building for the Olympics, we had to remove most of the dumped cars because they weren't BMW, so it was a breach of the sponsorship rules. There was a lot of work we had to do to clear the site. So buildings demolished. And interestingly, the challenge with demolishing buildings, with tunnelling in order to remove 52 electricity pylons, so tunnelling, you generate a lot of arisings as you go through the ground. And we moved 2 million tonnes of soil, and half of it was contaminated. But the commitment, this is a giant washing machine, the commitment was to reuse the materials that arose from our work for sustainability reasons, to cut down on vehicle traffic around the site because this was in a busy urban area and big lorries and pedestrians and cyclists don't really mix very well. But when you do this, you're exposing people to materials over and over again. If you just dig up something and dump it in a lorry, put a sheet over it and take it off site, it's job done. But if you've got to move it across site, stockpile it, then handle it again to get it through the cleanup, those contaminants in the soil are potentially available for exposing the workers 2, 3, 4 times. And so right from the beginning, something that I'm going to come back to, we had a focus on health, not just injury prevention in terms of quick accidents, but if you like, the slow accidents that occur when people breathe stuff in, get it on their skin, and it might take months or even years of exposure before they get harmed. And we regarded those as injuries as well. And I think that the early work that you've been doing on asbestos and some of the more recent focus that's gone on silica dust is an indication that really health-like safety is the sort of approach that you use very similar management techniques, methodologies, ways of assessing risks, deciding appropriate controls, discussing it openly, making things explained so that workers are not treated as robots that need to be programmed to work safely, but become active players in their own game of controlling the work in a way that means that they're not harmed. And that requires a level of education, commitment to education, that I think is palpable in Christchurch, that people don't just have the rules on a board and fingers wagging at them. They get involved in discussions, those daily activity briefings, etc. That's what I mean by a different way of working. It's not just the outcome that you aim for. It's a way of working that means that every time you come up against a new problem, you've got a machine that you can operate in order to address that problem. And the machine is populated by real people who become masters and mistresses of their own fate. And I think that is a way of treating construction workers with more respect than they've ever been treated before, and is probably the biggest difference in terms of the soft side of what the rebuild is doing, the biggest difference between New Zealand construction before Christchurch and now. I mentioned we did a lot of infrastructure work at London 2012, and that means a lot of holes in the ground. This is the pumping station for a deep foul sewer. And one of the challenges that we were faced with is how do you motivate people to work safely and healthily? And people thought to begin with, and right through to the end, that in our case the answer was, well, it's the Olympics, let's have it glitzy, let's get Usain Bolt to come and talk to the workers. But actually what we found was that it wasn't the great venues that were being built that got people's pulses racing, because when you're pouring the foundations for a Zaha Hadid designed aquatic centre, it actually looks and feels bloody well like the foundations of any other building you've worked on. It might be on a different scale and a different shape, but it feels, those tunnellers, it was another hole in the ground. And then when they were down in that hole, I mean, the idea, where's the Olympics? If we'd have kept saying that, I mean, people would have just started yawning. The thing that seemed to float the boat was much more to do with pride in the way that the job was being done. The fact that there was a step change in the way in which work was being done in the industry. It was the craftsmanship, the pride in the way that I'm working is healthier, safer, higher quality, looking after the environment. In other words, we realised that the construction workers were the heroes and heroines of the story, rather than waiting for the athletes to arrive as the kind of icing on the cake. The athletes didn't define what was being achieved, the workers did. And I think that's the story that you're telling as well. And while we were doing this, we were building Europe's largest housing complex during that period, 3,000 homes. And housing in the UK is the most hazardous area of work for construction workers if you look at the stats, because there's a lot of small builders. But also, when you're doing this sort of work, even though you might employ a lot of people, at peak we had nearly 6,000 workers on this site building these 3,000 homes. Because remember, we were working to that drop-dead deadline of the opening ceremony, so this had to be available in time for the athletes and the officials to move in. When you think about this kind of building work, it isn't very long before the frame is up and people are doing fit out room by room. So people are working quite isolated. If you're a supervisor, you can do a bit of management by walking about, but you're touching base on the work that's going on under your control periodically. It's not like that pouring of the foundations where you've got a whole gang of people and the foreman, the people wearing the black hats, can see exactly how everyone's working and intervene. You're very much more reliant on people genuinely managing their own work in a safe and healthy way. And the reason why house building traditionally has had a higher accident rate, even though you would say in other ways, a lot of the work is less risky. I mean, piling, you can lose your hearing and you can be crushed by big machines and all of that. The reason why this has got a higher accident rate is because of that individual working without properly empowering the workers to know, understand what good looks like and be motivated to follow it. So again, engagement seems to be the kind of magic key to almost everything that we're trying to achieve. And of course, the aim was to end up with something, that looked brilliant at the time. But as I hope I've explained adequately, it was really the aftermath. We thought this was leveraging regeneration in a poor part of London. And it's been phenomenal, I think, really successful. Now, many of you will know that there was a bit of research done to try and identify what were the precursors? How did we set the work up in a way that made it more likely that we'd end up with a decent health and safety outcome? And that was a report called Preconditioning. And you can find links to that just by Googling it. You can find links to the report from the ACC website and do a search on that. And the first few pages of the document, it's over 100 pages altogether, and it's written by university academics from Loughborough University. But the first few pages really highlight the chromosomes that were in the genome that represented the DNA of the project. And I think it's fascinating. I'm just going to pick some of these key words. Respect is what I was talking about, the way that you treat a workforce, but also, if you're a client, the way that you should be treating the companies in the supply chain. that they're going to bring something to the party. They don't just need to have a wagging forefinger telling them what to do. Trust that once you've explained to people what you want and you've got this feeling that you're making it possible for them to achieve it, that you trust them to work through and deliver it, that you don't try and micromanage. And that goes back to that ACC use of the word partnership. I really like the word clarity. Wiramu, who some of you will have had the privilege of listening to, comes from the forestry sector, was a bushman, and has a really compelling story to tell. We were talking this morning on the way here about what makes a worker comfortable at work. And one of the key elements is being absolutely crystal clear of what's expected. That the more that you're uncertain what you're really supposed to be doing, the more that it becomes a matter of chance whether you deliver a good job. And that makes you feel insecure and uncomfortable. You don't know whether you're going to be told, we don't want you here because you're not working properly. Or good job, well done, we'd like you to move on to the next package when this job comes to an end. If you're not clear about what you're supposed to be doing, how the hell do you work hard in order to deliver it? And most people come to work to do a decent job. And a lot of people aren't clear enough about what they expect. That's why we published the standard and why the Tideway team have done the same. So lots of words, but none of these words, communicative, open, fair, and that meant paying bills on time as far as the client was concerned, and then insisting that the main contractors did the same down their supply chain. None of these words in this kind of DNA of London 2012 say anything about construction. None of them are technical. They're about who we are, what our values are, what our beliefs are, and how we then act on that in a way that if we were discussing a family, something that I've learnt from Wiramu is that you can always talk about the workplace and talk about family, partly because we want people to go home safe and healthy at the end of each working day, but also it tells you something about the underpinning of human values. And if you think of a family where communication is good, where as the children get older, they're empowered to manage their own lives, where people are fair to each other, where they trust each other, isn't that the kind of life that you'd want to lead and the people that you want? Well, why shouldn't the workplace look like that? So this isn't about construction. And a lot of what you've been doing in the rebuild is setting a standard that isn't just about the sector that you work in and certainly isn't just about Christchurch. The outcome of all of this, and the reason why I think it's of interest, is that from the predicted 3 deaths for 85 million hours worked, we had no fatalities. We had 1 or possibly 2 life-changing injuries, compared with the 75 that the UK construction industry run rate would have predicted. Now, if I'd have been presenting to a New Zealand board for, let's say, Christchurch 2012, and I'd have looked at the New Zealand statistics in 2005 to prepare my paper, I'd have been saying to the board, working 85 million hours to build this Olympic Park and its venues, we can predict from the New Zealand run rate that we will be killing 21 people in the course of completing the project. Fatality rate in construction industry in New Zealand before you started was 7 times the rate of the UK. It was hard enough saying to the board members, if we carry on and do business as usual, we'll kill 3. I don't know how I'd have summed up the courage to talk about 21. And they thought it was unacceptable. And that's why we set a target of 0. And we delivered it. And we delivered it partly because of a vision. This is the wording from the project directors of all of those major projects. The stadium cost £450 million. The aquatic centre was nearly as much because it included the main bridge, bringing those 250,000 visitors each day at games time into the park. So directors of projects of that scale are not numpties. They're not kind of clerk typists, junior members of a team. They are running a major business. I mean, a business that turns over £450 million in 3 years is a bloody big business. And they are effectively the managing director of that business as project director. They were the ones that were obliged to attend the equivalent of the safety charter, a monthly meeting of the programme Health and Safety Leadership Team, Safety, Health and Environment Leadership Team, SHELT. And since we established one of those, every major project in the UK, Hinkley New Nuclear, the Tideway, Crossrail, all of those major projects have set up leadership teams on the same model because it works. And those people met, and early on they established a vision that you didn't need to be a technical expert or an academic to understand. Healthiest meant no ill health, safest meant no accidents. Absolutely crystal. Everyone could get that. So you look at your leadership challenge and the way that you've risen to it. By demonstrating leadership and working together, we will rebuild Canterbury safely and create a legacy we can be proud of. You see, your legacy is not just about what you're building, it's the way that you're doing it. And the benefit is that when we celebrated the opening of the Games, we could just party feeling good. There was no bad taste at the back of the throat because we remembered all of those hurt people, all of those funerals that we'd gone to. It was the opposite of that. We were able to celebrate how we did it as well as what we'd done. And I think that's what you're going to be doing in the future. So we have this programme leadership team, and this is the one thing that Canterbury needs to start spawning on the larger projects. We had project leadership teams. So the person that attended the leadership team for London 2012 for health and safety for the stadium returned to the stadium and chaired the leadership team at the stadium, and now, sitting in the chair, the people around him were the project directors for the major subcontractors working on the stadium. So you take leadership and it just echoes, it's like Russian dolls, at every level, all the way down, as you'll see, to the way in which we worked with supervisors. Because we recognised that the way that people felt leadership on site wasn't because they met the managing director of Hawkins on a daily basis. That's not the way it works. The person putting them to work, giving them instructions, saying, hang on a minute, that's not quite right, asking their opinion, creating the working environment emotionally, physically, intellectually, that each worker operates in. The person who shapes the work that goes on is the supervisor. That's the leader for that team. And we promote people because they're good on the tools and expect them to suddenly become Barack Obama making speeches about yes, we can. You know, we expect people to give tailgate briefings or daily activity briefings, to motivate teams to work well, to intervene when something's going wrong and stop people working. Someone that might be 20 years more experienced than them, and they're going to say, hang on a minute, George, that's not the way that I think we should do work like that. And yet we don't equip them enough. So we ran a training program that was nothing to do with inspecting scaffolds or excavations or, the technical work. That was the responsibility of their employers, to promote people to supervisory levels that were competent to do the technical work. We trained them to be leaders. We trained them to be able to do that daily activity briefing, to look up, make eye contact, to listen as well as broadcast. And when we did it, we celebrated it, by the way. That poster that you saw, that was reproduced every couple of months as people churned through the program. It was only a day and a half of training, spread as 3 half days over a month. And as people finished the course, their photograph was taken. It ended up as a poster at the entrance to every project on site. And they got a small version to take home to their families to say, look what I've done. Look how I'm being celebrated as a leader. And then, like you, we were absolutely clear that from induction right the way through to behavioural safety programs, but with posters, newsletters, briefings, that you have to keep communicating, but communication has got to be two-way. And so, for example, we established, you've got most of your sites that I visited have got boards that talk about the hazards and the risks, and they're used for briefing new workers coming in. They're a reminder for people as they come onto site. What we established in addition was you said we did boards. Now, the way we established it was someone came up with a bright idea, worked on a site with it, on one of our projects. It seemed to have a positive impact to generate feedback from the workforce, near-miss reports or opportunities for improvement. And the leadership team adopted it and said everyone should do it. So you find something that's good, you assess it and work out that it is good enough, it's making an improvement, it's making a contribution, and you use your leadership program to get everyone to adopt it. So gradually you're ratcheting up the standards by continually looking for where good is appearing and get everyone to operate to that level. So it's a very powerful way of making continual improvement. And what you said we did boards achieved was providing feedback to workers on a weekly basis. The board was cleaned and the manager would write new statements coming from the workforce and supervisors about things that weren't quite right or could be better on site. And the we did column told you what management had done to address the issues. And as you do that, you think how simple that is. But doing that actually liberated the knowledge and expertise of those workers at the sharp end who are actually facing the risks. Because it was saying to them, we listen to you and we act. So it wasn't about great speeches, it was about the reality of look what we've done on site because you told us that that walkway wasn't safe in the evenings because it was too dark and people might trip up. And we've put a light in there, damn simple. What happens on most sites is the light is put in if people know about it and think about it and decide to act. But they don't tell the workforce that because we've listened, we've learned something we wouldn't have known otherwise until we'd wait for an accident to occur. You've allowed us to preempt something that is a risk that could turn into an accident. And the You Said We Did board, a felt tip pen on a whiteboard, how easy is that? So we were continually looking for ways of thanking the workforce for helping us all work together as a team to make it the safest and healthiest construction programme that the UK had ever seen. And then we tried to do things back in return. When was the last time you felt that the paperwork on site represents a manual handling risk? That the burden of it means that people might end up with damaged backs. There's too much of it, isn't there? But we've got photographs. We can take a picture and say this is what we do not want to see, and a picture of the way that we think good would look. And we can just issue that to the supervisors. They can brief it to their teams. If someone's going to do an inspection, they're on exactly the same page because they're looking for the good and trying to avoid the bad. So there's no interpretation of on line 27, there's a semicolon in that sentence. So actually it means that you need a permit to work at this point. There's none of that bollocks. This is clear, crystal. Literacy becomes almost irrelevant because you're being clear about what you want. Going back to clarity. And I think one of the responsibilities of health and safety leaders is to make it easier for our people to be brilliant so that we have less meetings saying, why won't the buggers work safely? How irritating is that? When people don't work healthily and safely and they get injured or their health is damaged so they don't go home to their families in one piece, the only people that you need to look to are their leaders. We just need to be clear about that. You make it easy for people to work well, you make it difficult for them to work badly. And that includes penalties and compliance checks and all of that. I'm not just, this is not a rose garden. But if things are going wrong, you look to the captain on the field to change the instructions. If things are going wrong in a business and the money is going in the wrong direction, you look to the board and the managing director and the senior executives. You don't go and blame the guy on the machine in the tool shop. Why is it any different on a construction site? When people are working unsafely, the responsibility always has to lie with the people that get paid a hell of a lot more to make sure that that isn't happening. We need to put more effort in at the top end to make it easier and simpler for people to do the right thing. And we need to celebrate what they're doing. This was towards the end of our work. And we ran this poster because we thought it was going to be athletes saying, thanks for finishing the velodrome. I'm looking forward to winning a gold medal on it. And I had Chris Hoy all lined up with his Made in France magic wheels and everything to come down and thank people for working so well on building the velodrome and ask them to be careful in the last few months as they're finishing off the work to not have an accident. I thought that would motivate people. I was wrong. We did a survey of the workforce, and this was the result. A little bit of marketing research, led by our comms team. Brilliant people that helped us produce high-quality communication materials. This is a worker working in the velodrome. We did a bit of a giggle with Photoshop, and we had one of the women who was working as an electrician on the aquatic centre, photoshopped in full PPE, but without a hard hat, but with high vis and boots, diving into the dive pool in the aquatic centre. And the quote on the left-hand side of the poster is another worker talking about how proud he is of the standard of work and how we need to carry on at that standard to get the work over the line without anyone being hurt. That we've done so well for 5 years in building this that we've got to keep hold of the record. In other words, the workers, like I said earlier, the thing that they were proudest of was the way that they'd been working. That was the biggest motivator. And I think that you are now achieving stats in Canterbury that will result in the workers being nervous about being the ones that might end up blotting the copybook. It's a fantastic position to be in. You get tremendous peer pressure from everyone around working safely, because that's what we do around this rebuild. So for too long, health and safety has been about compliance checks. We made it about celebration of what good looked like. So when we did inspections and found that everything was okay, people got pin badges. The first time that we worked 1 million hours without a lost time, we organised a breakfast for the guys, but a photo opportunity first with David Higgins, my chief executive, and Sebastian Coe, the man in that handshake photo where I started. They all then went for breakfast in the canteen with David and Seb working the room, thanking people, asking what it was like working on the park. And you can see this is early doors. You know, we've still got those buildings to demolish. That's still not part of the ODA site. We hadn't compulsorily purchased that bit. It's a freight yard. When they came out, my comms colleagues had reproduced this photo and put each one in a frame, and the guys got a framed picture to take home to their families. That's so much better than telling people off for not wearing the hard hat, isn't it? If you keep on reinforcing the behaviours you want, you end up with a much more powerful outcome. And behavioural safety says that you should have 4 elements of positive reinforcement for every time you criticise. And that's what most health and safety inspection reports are like, right? They're not a list of non-compliances, are they? They're always about identifying everyone working safely and healthily with the I mean, not in my experience. I got some early inspection reports and I sent them back to the staff that were reporting into me saying, I'm not accepting this. Every time you find something wrong, you must have walked past at least 4 things that were right. And if you don't reflect those in your report, you're not working for me anymore. It was a yellow card, it will be a red one next time. You're not allowed to point out that someone wasn't wearing the right PPE unless you identify how many people you saw who were wearing the right PPE. And funnily enough, it turns out that the non-compliances are a tiny minority of the good behaviour. What a surprise. And by celebrating the good behaviour, you create fantastic pressure on people that aren't displaying it. Much better than shouting at them and telling them off is to make them feel as though they're the excluded ones because they're not part of the celebration of things being done right. And it's like raising your kids. I mean, any of us that have had the privilege of doing that, if you spend all your time criticising them, you create a horrible atmosphere. But you don't, do you? Every time they do something that's good, you praise them to the skies because you want to reinforce that behaviour and also to make them feel good about it. That's the way that we raise our kids, to get them to do the right thing. Why should it be any different when we're working with colleagues? To talk about the positives instead of just banging on about the things that aren't right. And the final point that I want to make is that we honestly don't know how good we can be. I don't know how safe and healthy the Christchurch rebuild can be. You don't know either, do you? You don't know how much you can enhance people's well-being by bringing them together and using the workplace as a place to talk about fatigue, alcohol, other things that are to do with lifestyle, not just to do with the work. We don't know how much we can influence the people on our site so that when they go to other sites, they influence them as well. We don't know how brilliant we can be. We know how bad we have been in the past, but we don't know how high we can push that bar. So that mechanism that I was talking about, in Tideway, the Tideway Tunnel, it's now been captured as something called transformational health and safety. Find out where the best is, adopt it, and get everyone to work to that. Empower and encourage people to look for improvements. Get them to test it and pilot it. If it works, let them share it with everyone else, and let that become the new normal. And gradually you ratchet up the performance, and we don't know how good it can be. Until Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, we didn't know people could run that fast, and now that's a record that's way behind in history. We don't know how good we can be, we just know how bad it was in the past and that we're committed to making it better. And I think that's what human beings do best, is make tomorrow better than yesterday, partly because of our commitment to the world that we want to leave for our children. And I wanted to end by just flagging up what I think is next. I don't think that any of us in construction spend enough time addressing the thing that damages more people more seriously, shortens more lives, than accidental injuries, and that's exposure to risks to health at work. In the UK, for every worker killed on a construction site last year, we killed 40 because they'd worked in construction and been exposed to asbestos. So I'm saying all accidents, electrocutions, falls from height, struck by moving plant, all accidentally caused fatalities are dwarfed by one exposure to one health risk. So that's not talking about silicosis and silica-related cancer. It's not talking about welding with stainless steel and being exposed to chromates and getting lung cancer from that. It's not talking about contaminated land and lead poisoning. Not talking about the myriad occupational health exposures that are routine in our industry, plus the ones that don't kill, but maim, disable, diminish people's lives. Noise-induced hearing loss only kills you if you get so frustrated by it that you commit suicide, but it diminishes your life. Do you like music? Do you like listening to children talking to you? It really makes a difference. So I think that health has got to come up the agenda and be treated like safety, with the same methodologies, with the same senior people leading the charge. Different technological elements to it, the harness for working at height and the properly erected scaffold to provide edge protection are different technological solutions associated with falls from height to dealing with dust suppression and respiratory protection in dealing with silica risk. But that technological content shouldn't blind us to the fact that management ownership of the risks and a determination to control and manage those risks is almost identical. The second issue, I think, is that I'm very bothered that we've had this complete focus on behavioural safety. We run those commitment sessions and we get people to really get juiced up on behaving right. And I think they're terrific, but they deal with what the Americans call violations. If you run a good behavioral safety program, you help to encourage people to decide and commit to work safely. So they won't deliberately break the rules. They will be compliant more often than not. But what it doesn't do is address error when you make a mistake. That's different. Making mistakes comes from not really thinking through the situation that you're in, not being mindful. So you know what the rules are. We were discussing forestry. The wind's sprung up. The environment's different. Shouldn't you be back in the moment? You've been following the rules. You've got all the right equipment. You're working with a team. You're in radio contact. The distances are right. But it's now getting a bit windy. At what point do you say that this wind has changed the situation and we might need to modify or even stop the work that we're doing? That's not about rule following. That's being in the moment, in the context, and using your skill, knowledge, and experience to make the right judgment within the freedom of movement that can't be completely specified in a rule book. And I think that we need to do more work to show respect for the skills of our workforce, to encourage them to make those moment-by-moment decisions correctly. And when you do that, you find that the partnership with the workforce becomes ever stronger because you're displaying respect for their own skill, knowledge, and experience, and being much more clear about relying as much on that as relying on the permits to work and the procedures and the policies. You're also relying on people who really know the job, doing it in the right way. And sometimes that right way is when you read between the lines of the procedure and still come to the right conclusion and do things safely. I think we need to do a little bit more around that. And the third area, I don't know about you, but I am just bored to tears with inductions. I think they are shite. The main problem with them is that they're not something that you expose people to during their work. They're often absolutely their first experience of working for you. And if they are an incredible turn-off to the rules around health and safety and the way in which we want people to work, I mean, what a beginning. As a great conductor, Adrian Bolt, great classical music conductor, and he said, when you're playing a symphony, what really matters is the introduction and the finale. What you diddle about within the middle, the audience won't really notice and they'll forget about. But the way you start and the way you finish is what really matters. I think we're good at finishing. I think we're getting much better at finishing in construction. We treat people much better as jobs come to an end. We talk much more about the experience of the work. We get feedback from people. But our start is awful. And we need to up our game. We need to make those inductions as exciting as construction work actually is, because most of it is brilliant. An induction is like kind of being imprisoned for an hour or two to gain, until you gain your freedom and you can start the real work. Now, interestingly, workers don't design induction programs. Seems to be something that managers and health and safety practitioners do. We've got no one else to blame but ourselves if it's rubbish. But overall, what you're doing in Canterbury, a bit more on time than I am with this presentation, I think is brilliant. And I hope that there is a real sense of pride growing up, because what we found at London 2012, as I was suggesting with that poster of the guy in PPE on the bike in the velodrome, and that wasn't photoshopped, he was actually cycling on the track. And what you couldn't see was that there were 500 workers standing in the centre of the arena, cheering as he cycled round on a fixed-wheel bike, which is quite difficult to operate if you're not used to it. What we found was the thing that drove performance to the highest level that we didn't, a level that we weren't sure was achievable, was people increasingly taking pride in driving the performance to a level that we weren't sure was achievable. And I hope that people in Christchurch are taking pride in what you're doing here and the influence that you're beginning to wield, not just across New Zealand, but around the world. Thanks very much for your attention.